It's me, Lori, and I'm going to tell you a story today. Or more specifically, today I'm going to read a story. One of my sisters, I have two, passed away when she was 38, but she loved dragons. So did my mother. Anyway, one of her favorite book series was called The Dragon Riders of Pern. And it's a great story. And if you love to read, I would certainly suggest that you get this series of book. It was written, I want to say, way back in the 60s. They're certainly not new stories, but she has a very, very intensive vocabulary, which I love, but it makes it extremely difficult to read out loud. I read it out loud with my daughter, and I'll probably never do it again. But I would say, like to read, pick up those books. Dragon Riders of Pern, there's, I think, 3 of them in the first series. My favorite being Ruth the White Dragon. Check it out. I can't remember the name of the woman who wrote it. Anne McCaffrey, I think. Anyway, this is a more current day well, it's a fantasy story, of course, but it's set more in current times. So, and it's a delightful story, and it's about a Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department officer who happens to be a badass woman. Go women. And her partner is a dragon. Okay, so details, they'll explain themselves in this first book. So here we go. Oh, and just one more note. I am not a professional audiobook recorder. I am not a professional podcaster. I have no professional equipment. I'm literally using my MacBook camera and microphone. So I apologize for all of the noise. I don't sit still and I wiggle a lot. So there will be lots of background noise. Just imagine that you're sitting in my living room with a crackling fire and a hot cup of cocoa. Maybe spiked with a little Baileys or peppermint schnapps or Fireball, whatever flips your trigger, or CBD or whatever. Anyway, but actually today we're in my guest room because it's quieter. So without further ado, Dragons Are a Girl's Best Friend, Chapter 1. Most traffic jams are caused by human error. This was no exception. The giant, slime-covered walrus caterpillar nightmare glared at me through the pinkish slits that I had pegged as its eyes. 3 yellowing tusks as long as my forearm glistened with a venom that had already eaten through several inches of tarmac, and trapped beneath the nightmare's bulging layers of fat in the cage of its many chitinous legs was a 6-year-old girl. The traffic had ground to a halt behind it, and all of the pedestrians but one had fled. Some jerk in a sporty red, "Hey, look at me" Mustang laid on his horn like he was the one with something to complain about here. And the last remaining pedestrian, it was a woman I assumed was the girl's mother, screamed hysterically on the sidewalk. I blocked it all out and focused on the next 10 seconds. My gun had the best chance of taking the monster down, but I was in the middle of Cerberus Avenue in Las Vegas, and my target was an unknown entity. I didn't know how fast this thing could move, or how dense the rolling layers of flesh were. If I missed, which really was unlikely, or if the bullet plowed through the blubber and just kept going, there was too much risk of a casualty. And even if the bullets did land where I intended, the little girl beneath the giant monstrosity could wind up crushed or injured. And if I merely pissed the creature off instead of incapacitating it, the slippery nightmare might contort its gelatinous body past the dislodged grate of the storm drain and take the girl with it. If it got into the network of sewer tunnels beneath the city, this rescue story would not end well. The little girl was quiet now, her wide-eyed attention fixed on me, mirroring the monster that towered above her. Tears had left wet tracks on her cheeks, but the sight of a glorious copper dragon swooping down to deposit me onto the road had momentarily distracted the summoned creature from its meal, and distracted the meal too. Her mother? Not so much. The best course of action was to have my dragon partner yank the monster skyward while I dove to protect the girl, but Aurelius was already busy going after the idiot who'd summoned the nightmare walrus so that he could not summon anymore. Now, technically, we were supposed to stick together to protect each other's backs, and if either of us got hurt, which honestly usually was me, we'd be taken to task for it, but jobs rarely slotted neatly into the LVMPD's play nice regulations. The girl was about the same age as my youngest sister, and I was trying very hard not to imagine Sage in her place. Trying very hard not to imagine Sage's dark brown eyes, shining with that heart-wrenching combination of terror and trust. A trust I might fail to live up to. How could anyone live up to the trust of the innocent? My hands were trembling with adrenaline when I needed them to be steady. Sweat pooled beneath my body armor. High above, the late morning sun bore relentlessly down on us, unmoved by the disaster waiting to happen. If only I could be similarly unmoved. I needed to focus, think rationally. My eyes flicked back to the asshat who'd laid on the horn. He was conceited enough to have a vanity plate advertising his personal brand of power, Telekin. Telekinetic magic would come in awfully handy right now. But the magic revolution had demonstrated how fantastical superhero stories really were. It turns out, if you give a bunch of people superpowers, most of them, they just use it to help themselves. I dashed to the Mustang and yanked open the door and grabbed Jerkface's wrist. Hey! Power flooded up my arm, and I flung it in the monster's direction. Now, bigger isn't always better when it comes to telekinetic magic, so I chose the smallest and lightest target that I thought would get the job done. One of the chitinous legs flew upward, and the girl shot out from underneath the nightmare's abdomen. What the hell? Jerkface was trying to yank his arm out of my grip. I hung on and used just a fraction of the magic that I was drawing to slosh some of his cold brew coffee on his shirt to give him just something else to worry about for a minute. The monster roared its outrage as its meal was snatched out of reach. I concentrated on sending the girl skimming over the tarmac until she crashed into her mother's arms. No time for relief. I let Jerkface go. Thanks for your cooperation, sir. He sputtered something, but I didn't hear it. I was already sprinting towards the raging monster. I shouted as I ran, needing it to focus on me instead of its stolen prey. The walrus thing turned. I freed my magic taser, shoved it up to maximum voltage, and shot. The target wreathed, and the slime coating its body was probably making the electricity coursing through it more painful. I hoped so. Painful, but not paralyzing. And not painful enough to persuade the summoned nightmare to flee back to its own plane. The violent thrashing dislodged the prongs, and the creature squeezed down the sewer opening. Crap. If I lost track of it in the tunnels, it could emerge anywhere in the city to wreak a fresh round of havoc, and the homeless sometimes used those tunnels for shelter. So I dove down after it. I knew that I had erred when I slammed against the wall of the tunnel. Without my body armor, the force of it probably would have splintered my ribs. As it was, I felt like I'd been bitch-slapped by a dragon. A particularly foul-smelling dragon. The rank, musky odor of the slime coating its body, and now mine as well, trickled my gag reflex. I didn't have the time nor the space to vomit. It was dark, but not pitch black, thanks to the light filtering down through the open drain hole. But with my cheeks squashed against the rough concrete, my field of vision was seriously limited. And worse, my dominant arm, the one with access to my taser and my gun, it was pinned behind my back. So I pushed through my body shock and into the creature's disgusting, clammy flesh at the same time. I couldn't pull any magic from our undesirable contact, but with the tiny wiggle room I created, I used my sort of free arm to yank out my knife and shove it into the smothering wall of fat and muscle. The monster flinched away, and I whipped my gun up and fired 1, 2, 3 rounds right into its center mass. Not that it was a difficult shot at this proximity. My ears protested the blast by the din amplified in the close confines of the tunnel, but at least the bullets didn't ricochet. The creature bellowed and reared back on its powerful tail, getting as high as the space would allow. Multiple legs grappled to secure me in place while it readied those tusks to dive deep into my skull. The spindly legs were stronger than they looked, and I slashed at the nearest of them with my knife, kicked away several more, and launched myself towards the creature's abdomen, hoping that it wouldn't anticipate my trying to get closer. I slashed again, carving a big, jagged wound in its bulbous gut, and it squirted slippery, ink-colored fluid all over me. This time its roar was one of definite pain, and it slammed its body to the ground, trying to flatten me. I dove out of the way, scraping my hands and knees on the gritty floor. Hard. Before we could repeat that delightful experience, I rolled to shoot more bullets, this time right at its head. Another ear-splitting shriek, the half-risen creature jerked and crashed into one side of the tunnel. The whole tunnel vibrated with the force. And then the monster winked out of existence, leaving only slime, venom, inky fluid, and that very foul odor behind. Ooh. End of chapter 1.